online violence is interconnected with offline violence, creating a continuum of harm facilitated by technology. Another emerging issue with regards to freedom of expression online is social media and content regulation. So social media has revolutionized activism. For those who've seen what happened in Kenya during the anti-finance bill protest, there's a lot of social media activism, but it also poses risks like the spread of disinformation and the creation of harmful content through this disinformation or misinformation. So this policy brief outlined how these were challenges in the freedom of expression, and there's also the cases that I outlined, like the Nigerian case of Diana Ele Uloko versus the Inspector General of Police, where a woman's phone was destroyed while she was recording her sister's arrest. And it illustrates the challenges faced by citizens when attempting to use social media to express themselves, right? There was also an ECOWAS court ruling that in Nigeria that affirmed that Twitter's access is essential to freedom of expression, setting a precedent for social media regulation. And what are the recommendations that I gave in this policy brief, even as I wind up? The first thing is that there's need to mitigate TFGBV. TFGBV is technology facilitated gender-based violence. So this is through legislation where countries should implement comprehensive legislation to address TFGBV, including clear definitions of digital harassment and accountability measures. There's also law enforcement and judiciary, where there's need for capacity building for law enforcement and judicial bodies. That is crucial in handling cases of online violence effectively. There's also international collaboration. There's need for international collaboration between various stakeholders to ensure that the online environment is safe and that perpetrators of TFGBV are held accountable. There's also need for legal frameworks that must align with international human rights standards, ensuring protection of vulnerable groups. Another recommendation that I gave is on enhancing social media usage and content regulation. So I talked about the need for balanced regulation, where governments should strike the balance between regulating harmful content online and protecting free speech. This includes enacting transparent content regulation policies in collaboration with stakeholders. I also talked about digital literacy, where there's need for public awareness campaigns and digital literacy programs that are essential to help citizens recognize misinformation and disinformation. And social media platforms should also be held accountable through transparent algorithm accountability measures that promote fact-checking and avoid arbitrary censorship. And lastly, I recommended judicial oversight, where governments should prevent unnecessary internet shutdowns, ensuring that freedom of expression is protected in online spaces. So in conclusion, the policy brief concludes by highlighting the complexity of protecting freedom of expression while addressing the harmful consequences of unregulated digital spaces. Countries like Ethiopia, Togo, and Malawi have implemented strict or restrictive measures such as internet shutdown, censorship, and others that limit democratic participation and human rights. Sorry, I've just been informed that I was going too fast. Okay, I'll just finish up. So this policy brief calls for a multifaceted approach, including collaboration among governments, social media companies, and the civil society to promote digital literacy, strengthen fact-checking mechanisms, and develop smart regulations. And by doing so, sub-Saharan African countries can ensure that freedom of expression is preserved while mitigating harmful practices like TFGBV and disinformation. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor for any questions. Okay, so I'm done, and I'll welcome the second speaker to proceed with his presentation.
Hello. Good morning. I am the second speaker. I am Mahen Basgopal from Mauritius. I'm just willing that the desk officer over there can show the slides that I have provided to him. Anyway, if it's taking some time, let me just start by saying that the title is Bridging the Digital Divide in Africa, Indian Ocean States, and I'll be speaking about the Indian Ocean states within Mauritius, Rodrigue Island, Réunion, and Madagascar. So I am Mahen Basgopal, and I am from Mauritius. I am the Secretary General of an NGO which we started in 1990. And then we went forward with internet governance and things related to internet. And since a decade now, we are hosting the Mauritius Internet Governance in Mauritius, which we just did last month. So today, I'm just resuming what is bridging the digital divide in Africa, Indian Ocean states. In today's heavily digitalized world with emerging job opportunities in the field of information technology, it's astonishing that a significant number of people in Africa still lack access to the internet. Despite pressing concerns such as health, education, and security, internet access and digital literacy are important needs that must be urgently addressed. In 2019, only 28% of Africans had internet access, in contrast to the global average of 72%. Internet connectivity was predominantly confined to urban areas, leaving only 6.3% of rural areas with access like this information is coming from the International Telecommunications Union in 2020. As per I'm sorry, it's just going a little bit up. Yeah. Good. And as internet access is fundamental for economic growth and is progressively being recognized as a basic right. In this paper, the discussion will be centered on bridging the digital divide in Africa and the Indian Ocean islands. Next slide. Despite the challenges that the African continent faces, including security, health, and education, it has made considerable improvements in the digital field over the last years, notably through the urbanization of its population. Africa has the youngest population in the world, with approximately 70% of its sub-Saharan population being under the age of 30. It is imperative to ensure that our young population has access to the internet and digital inclusion. This is vital for them to have an equal footing with other parts of the world and to take advantage of opportunities in our fast-paced, increasingly digitalized world. In 2022, 36% of the African population has broadband internet access. But I can continue with this one. In 2022, 38% of the African population has broadband internet access, according to a report by UNESCO, which was published in 2023. compared to 24% in 2020. However, internet access is only the first step in achieving digital inclusion. The United Nations define digital inclusion as the equitable, meaningful, and safe access to use, lead, and design of digital technologies, services, and associated opportunities for everyone and everywhere. This involves access to affordable, robust broadband internet service, internet-enabled devices that meet the needs of the user, access to digital literacy training, quality technical support, applications on online content designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. Using this definition of digital inclusion, it is disheartening to see that Africa is still lagging behind in digital inclusion due to the gap between its urban and rural populations. And this is really true in Mauritius. The lack of basic necessities in rural areas makes digital inclusion a second priority. Despite its setbacks, the continent has taken steps to reach connectivity with the World Bank's help in over 70 digitalization projects since 2019 and has allocated $2.8 billion to 24 active digital development projects in sub-Saharan Africa in the past 50 fiscal years. As a result of the World Bank's initiatives, coastal and island states, including Liberia, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Djibouti, Comoros, Mauritania, and Togo, gain access to new submarine internet cables, helping to increase availability capacity and raising the average broadband download speed in the continent for 2.68 megabytes per second. In 2019 to 8.31 megabytes in 2022. Other remarkable improvements, I just missed it. So other remarkable improvements are seen in Ethiopia, where over 900,000 poor households in drought-prone communities received their benefits in electronic accounts in 2023, 43% of which are owned and operated by women. In Mozambique, the Social Protection and Economic Resilience Project increased the number of families with children in the poorest districts that receive social protection transfers through digital payments. From 2021 to 2022, the West Africa Regional Communications Infrastructure Program in Mauritania led a project that expanded connectivity to areas that were previously underserved or unserved. This was achieved by laying down 1.700 kilometers of fiber optic cable. As a result of this initiative, there was a 53% increase in the number of localities connected to broadband, and the average wholesale broadband price dropped by 99%, plummeting from $7,000 per month to $55 per month, increasing access to and affordability of internet services. In the Indian Ocean Islands, digital inclusion seems to be a little more advanced, as the islands of Mauritius and Seychelles are paving the way for other African countries. Mauritius Information and Communication Technologies Authority successfully implemented the Free Wi-Fi Zone project in 2023. This project stems from a governmental decision to establish free Wi-Fi facilities in major public areas such as traffic centers, hospitals, municipalities, and district councils. The aim is to reduce the digital divide and further promote connected communities. To further expand digital connectivity, the ICTA, which I just spoke of Mauritius, has collaborated with the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Telecommunication Union to secure a new satellite position in space for Mauritius, which aims to reduce the digital gap in Mauritius. At the last GDD event in April 2024, which centered around today's topic, bridging the digital divide in Africa and in the Indian Ocean islands, the national event created awareness and sensitized participants and representatives from various professions on internet governance. The event equipped community volunteers with knowledge regarding the digital divide and how to bridge it. It also educated participants on existing research risks that they face online. Furthermore, it equipped participants with skills on how to promote internet governance. In Seychelles, the Seychelles National Youth Council has taken the initiative to provide free internet access to all primary, secondary, and post-secondary schools, resulting in an increased number of students having internet access. In 2007, the National ICT Policy was issued. It aimed to promote the provision of accessible, universal, affordable, reliable, modern, and high-quality ICT facilities and services. More specifically, it aimed to promote the effective utilization of all installed ICT infrastructure, encourage the sharing and co-location of infrastructure and facilities, and support the deployment and maintenance of networks. In 2013, around 31 countries increased its membership from 7 countries. In partnership with the World Bank, it supports its member countries in transitioning Africa into the knowledge economy era by smartly using and leveraging information and communication technologies. So now I'm going to talk about the recommendation for digital inclusion in Africa and in the Indian Ocean islands. Despite all the efforts made by African countries and the islands within the Indian Ocean to bridge the digital divide in their localities, additional measures could be taken to accelerate digital inclusion. The first recommendation for this would be increasing the investment budget of the digital sector. In 2020, the digital economy contributed to 4.5% of Africa's GDP. However, Africa only spent 1.1% of the GDP on digital investment, while other advanced parts of the world invested 3.2% of the GDP in the digital sector by investing in the continent's digital future. Africa would not only create opportunities for its young population, but also increase its own GDP. From the investments made, computing devices would become more accessible to the people. By increasing its digital inclusion budget, Africa and its neighboring islands would bridge the digital divide and equip its population with the skills necessary to reach new levels of development. The second recommendation that I would like to propose is to increase digital education and literacy. This can be achieved by organizing workshops or digital literacy programs which will enable citizens to effectively control the physical components of a computer, to effectively control the components such as the keyboard, monitor, and the mouse. Participants will also learn how to access and utilize various software programs such as word processors, internet browsers, and messaging applications. Additionally, they will gain an understanding of how to communicate in digital spaces such as emails, social media sites, and other online forums. Furthermore, participants will learn how to identify the elements of a credible source and conduct online research effectively. And lastly, they will be educated on how to avoid scams, phishing schemes, and other
malicious activities. Increasing digital literacy is imperative as 80% of the middle-skill jobs require digital skills. The third recommendation is to improve the affordability and accessibility of internet access. In 2019, the average household spent by paying an additional 7.7% of the monthly income for just 1 gigabyte of the monthly gross national income per capita on broadband internet connection. This indicates a need to enhance affordability by opening the internet wholesale and retail markets to competition, thereby increasing the variety of broadband providers. This would allow people in rural or remote areas to maintain an online presence, which would have a positive impact on e-commerce and is significant in promoting economic growth. It is also advised to prioritize the investment in a digitally proficient workforce to foster the development of strong digital economies and competitive markets. Furthermore, emphasis should be placed on investing in digital platforms that deliver products and services through digital channels. And another critical aspect is the advancement of digital financial services to promote financial inclusion. The establishment of digital financial systems necessitates the reformation of monetary and financial regulations and supervisory systems to enable mobile phone operators to offer financial services. It is also vital to cultivate an environment that fosters digital entrepreneurship and innovation. With a large population of imaginative and creative youth, Africa has the potential to become the continent of startups. The last thing that we would like to say for bridging the digital divide is conducting sensitization campaigns on the existing gap and on important factors like cybersecurity and data protection, as it would be useless to provide people with access if they do not know the dangers that might entail. Examples of successful initiatives include so many in countries like Botswana and others. And I would like now to conclude that it is imperative for Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands to take steps to bridge the national digital divide by investing in digital infrastructure to improve access and quality. To accomplish this, the public and private sectors need to collectively invest in making connectivity more accessible and affordable, and data repositories that should be included. They will also have to invest in digital inclusion, digital education, and literacy to ensure the population's empowerment down to the unprivileged communities. And I would like now to thank you for your attention. Thank you. You're taking my picture. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Usutugile Konko, Su for short, and I am a climate activist under Amnesty International and Greenpeace Africa. So today I'm just here to give a mini speech on climate justice and internet freedom in Africa. So what we're looking at are deeply interconnected issues, climate justice and internet freedom in Africa. I think it's important for us to reflect on how these two seemingly distinct topics intersect and what they mean for the future of our continent. Africa stands at the forefront of the climate crisis. Our communities are experiencing its harshest impacts, yet we are among the least responsible for the emissions causing global warming. climate justice is not just about addressing environmental issues. It's about equity, fairness, and ensuring that vulnerable populations, those who contribute the least to climate change, are not left to bear the brunt of its effects. In parallel, the digital age has transformed how we communicate, advocate, and mobilize around these issues. The internet, when open and free, amplifies their voices, offers a powerful tool for African communities to amplify their voices in global conversations on climate justice. But what happens when access to the internet is restricted or when online freedoms are curtailed? The fight for climate justice becomes more challenging as it limits advocacy, education, and access to crucial resources. So today, I just want us to explore these topics in greater detail. So let me start by emphasizing the meaning of climate justice. It's about addressing the disproportionate impacts of climate change on poor and marginalized communities. For Africa, where over 400 million people still live in poverty, this issue is particularly critical. Take South Africa, for example. In 2022, South Africa was hit by devastating floods in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where I currently come from. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, leaving thousands homeless and over 400 people dead. Most of the hardest hit areas were impoverished communities living in informal settlements, many of which had inadequate infrastructure. While wealthier neighborhoods had the resources to rebuild quickly, these marginalized communities were left without assistance for months. This reflects the essence of climate injustice, those with the least resources having the inability to rebuild and are forced to bear the greatest burden of climate-related disasters. Now let's talk about the internet. The digital space has become an invaluable tool for activists, especially in the fight for climate justice. It allows people from all walks of life to participate in the conversations, access information, and hold their governments accountable. But what happens when the space is restricted? Imagine trying to organize a climate justice movement without social media or online platforms to spread awareness. Imagine communities already impacted by climate disasters not having access to real-time weather updates or government support systems because of internet shutdowns. This is a reality in many African countries where access to the internet is limited, either by cost or by government-imposed restrictions. In South Africa, internet access is more widespread, but there are still significant disparities in rural areas. And I think this is a huge issue because I don't think the inability to afford certain things or the lack of resources should be an impeding factor in you understanding and knowing what's currently happening globally with regards to climate justice. During the 2021 KwaZulu-Natal floods, many rural communities were cut off from vital updates due to limited digital infrastructure. The lack of digital literacy and access meant that many were unaware of the severity of the disaster until it was too late. This digital divide exacerbates existing inequalities, hindering climate adaptation efforts in marginalized communities. So how do we bridge these gaps in both climate justice and internet freedom? First, we need to recognize that climate justice is inherently linked to access to information. Governments and international organizations must work together to ensure that internet access is universal, especially in vulnerable regions. This will not only empower communities to advocate for themselves, but will also provide them with the tools and information that they need to respond to climate disasters. South Africa has already made strides in this regard. The country is part of the Paris Agreement and has committed to just energy transition, focusing on shifting away from coal dependence while protecting jobs in vulnerable sectors. However, more needs to be done to ensure that rural and marginalized communities are not left behind in this transition. Ensuring these communities have access to reliable internet will be a key part of enabling them to engage in benefits from the green economy. Senegal, too, is taking steps to address climate change through initiatives like the Great Green Wall Project, aimed at combating desertification. But to scale up such initiatives, the country needs to ensure that the citizens can communicate and organize freely without fear of internet restrictions. I firmly believe that internet freedom is essential to achieving climate justice. Without access to digital tools, African countries will struggle to participate in the global conversations on climate action. Moreover, limiting access to internet silences the voices of those most affected by climate change, the very people who should be leading the charge for justice. As we move forward, let us recognize the fight for climate justice and the fight for internet freedom are not separate struggles. They are deeply intertwined. We need to push for policies that ensure access to the internet for all, regardless of socioeconomic status or geographic location. And we need to ensure that climate policies are just, equitable, and designed with Africa's unique challenges in mind. South Africa, Senegal, and the African continent stand at crossroads. We can either continue down a path where the most vulnerable communities are left behind, or we can forge a new path, one that centers justice, equity, and the free exchange of information. In closing, I urge all of us to think critically about the role of internet in our advocacy and how we can use it to bring about the meaningful change. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the power to make a difference. Let's make sure we use them. Thank you.